There's a particular kind of silence that comes when you lose everything you've worked for. It's the silence Rick heard at 54, standing alone on a dusty plot of land with nothing but a pickup truck and a toolbox. He'd been a contractor once, a good one, with a crew and a reputation. Then came the bankruptcy. His business collapsed. His house was gone. His son stopped calling. The town that knew him turned away, but Rick still had his hands, and he knew how to build, so he started. One man, one foundation. No money, no help, no plan, except to keep moving forward. People drove past and wondered what the fool was doing out there in the heat. What could he possibly build that would change anything? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rick's hands had built half of Millstone County. For 25 years, his name meant something. Quality, work, fair prices, a crew of skilled men who showed up on time and took pride in what they left behind. He'd framed houses that sheltered 3 generations. He'd renovated the old library, rebuilt the fire station after the tornado in 2009, constructed the addition on Bridges Crossing Elementary that doubled its capacity. People used to point at buildings and say, "Rick did that." Now they pointed at him and whispered. The bankruptcy hadn't been sudden. Nothing that destroys a life ever is. It started with expansion, with ambition that felt like vision at the time. A partner who seemed solid, investments that looked smart on paper, loans that felt manageable until they weren't. Then the economy shifted. Projects dried up. The partner disappeared with most of the liquid assets. The dominoes fell in slow motion, each one taking months, but the ending was inevitable. The business folded. The house went to the bank. The crew scattered to other contractors who could still make payroll. His marriage had ended years before, back when Tyler was 16. That wound had nothing to do with money and everything to do with the hours Rick spent working, the attention he gave to other people's homes while his own fell apart. His ex-wife had remarried and moved to Phoenix. He didn't blame her. Some things can't be fixed with carpentry. But Tyler was different. Tyler was the cut that wouldn't heal. His son was 32 now, a successful architect in Denver, with a firm that did sustainable commercial design. Everything Rick had taught him about structure and integrity, Tyler had taken further, made modern, made his own. They'd been close once. Rick had brought Tyler to job sites when he was young, taught him to read a tape measure, to respect the wood, to understand that building something meant it had to last beyond you. Then came the divorce, and Tyler chose sides. Then came the bankruptcy, and Tyler stopped answering calls altogether. Rick understood what son wants, to watch his father fall. Bridges Crossing sat in the flat expanse of what locals called the High Basin, 3 hours from anything that qualified as a city. Population 3,800, mostly families that had been there for generations, working ranches or the grain elevator or the few businesses that lined Main Street. It was the kind of town where everyone knew your story before you finished living it. They knew Rick's story. They'd watched him build his company from nothing, watched it grow, watched it collapse. Some felt sorry for him. Most just felt uncomfortable, the way people do around failure. It reminded them how quickly things could turn. Vernon Ames had been Rick's main competitor for 2 decades. Vernon ran a smaller operation, did mostly remodels and repairs, never had Rick's ambition or his skill. But Vernon was still working. Vernon hadn't lost everything. And Vernon made sure Rick knew there was no work available, not for someone who'd proven unreliable, regardless of the past circumstances. The only person who treated Rick like he was still human was Paulette. Paulette ran the Morning Stop diner on the corner of Main and 3rd, a place that smelled like coffee and bacon grease at all hours. She was 58, built sturdy. With grey hair she kept short and practical. Her husband had died of a heart attack 5 years back, leaving her with the diner and a choice, give up or keep going. She'd kept going. She gave Rick coffee, free, every morning, though he always left whatever coins he had. She never asked questions, never offered pity that felt like judgment, just refilled the cup and let him sit in the back booth as long as he needed. The land Rick stood on now had been his father's. 5 acres of scrubland on the eastern edge of town, worthless for farming, too far out for residential development. His father had bought it in 1978 for almost nothing, thinking someday it might be worth something. It wasn't. But it was paid for, and somehow Rick had managed to keep it out of the bankruptcy proceedings. Some clerical oversight, some mercy from a judge who'd grown up in Bridges Crossing and remembered Rick's father. It was all he had left. Rick lived in a borrowed trailer on the property. Borrowed from Paulette's late husband's brother, a man who'd moved to California and didn't need it. The trailer was a 1987 model, rust eating through the skirting, windows that didn't quite seal, a hot plate instead of a stove. Rick slept on a mattress that sagged in the middle and kept his clothes in the same duffel bag he'd packed the day the bank took his house. He was 54 years old, and this was what remained. Most mornings he drove into town looking for work, day labor mostly, hauling debris from Vernon's job sites when Vernon was desperate enough to hire him, cleaning out barns for ranchers who paid cash, fixing fences, anything that didn't require trust or investment in his future. The money barely covered food and gas. At night, he sat in the trailer and felt the weight of everything he'd lost pressing down like a physical thing. The silence was the worst part, not just the absence of sound, but the absence of purpose. For 25 years, he'd known what he was building and why. Now, there was just empty time stretching forward. 3 months ago, he'd made a decision. It came to him in the middle of the night, lying awake on that sagging mattress. If no one would hire him, if the town had written him off, if his own son couldn't bear to speak to him, then he'd do the one thing he still knew how to do. He'd build. Not for money, not for reputation, just to prove to himself that his hands still worked, that he still had something to offer, that failure didn't erase 25 years of skill and knowledge. He'd build something for the people who needed it most. The people like him, who'd been pushed aside, who needed a place to gather and remember they still mattered. A community center. The idea came from a project that never happened. Back in 2003, a small congregation had hired Rick to design and build a fellowship hall. He'd drawn up plans, something modest but beautiful, with high windows and an open floor plan that could adapt to different needs. Then the congregation split over some doctrinal dispute, the project died, and the plans ended up in a drawer. Rick still remembered them. Every measurement, every angle, every detail. He'd spent months on that design, imagining the gatherings it would hold, the meals that would be shared, the way light would move through the space. He could build it from memory. He could adapt it, make it work for what the town needed now. A place for job training workshops, community meals, somewhere warm in winter for people who had nowhere else to go. He had no money, no permits, no help, just the land, his tools, and the knowledge in his head. So he started. The first foundation block went down on a Tuesday morning in early June. The sun was already brutal at 7 a.m., the kind of heat that made the air shimmer. Rick marked out the footprint with stakes and string, checked his measurements 3 times, then began mixing concrete by hand in a wheelbarrow he'd borrowed. By noon, his shirt was soaked through. By evening, he'd laid the first course of the foundation. It wasn't much. Most people driving past probably didn't even notice. But Rick noticed. He stood back as the sun set, looking at those concrete blocks, and felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. 3 weeks into the work, Rick had a foundation. 48 feet by 32 feet, concrete block reinforced with rebar he'd salvaged from a demolished gas station on Highway 17. The mortar joints were clean and level, the corners were square. It was good work, the kind that would last 100 years if the rest of the building ever got built. He'd settled into a rhythm. Up at dawn, work until the heat became dangerous around 2 p.m., rest in whatever shade he could find, then back at it until dark. His hands had toughened again, calluses forming over the soft spots that had developed during months of irregular work. His shoulders ached constantly, and his knees complained every time he stood up, but the pain felt honest, earned. People drove past regularly now. Some slowed down to look. A few stopped to ask what he was building. Rick told them, a community center, free to use, for anyone who needed it. The reactions were mixed. Some nodded politely and drove away. Others looked at him like he'd lost his mind. One rancher laughed outright and said, "Good luck with that, Rick." Nobody offered to help. The trailer sat 50 yards from the foundation, parked at an angle that caught whatever breeze managed to move across the flat land. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. Rick had grown used to the way the floor creaked, the way the door stuck, the particular rattle the windows made when the wind picked up. The storm came on a Thursday night in late June. Rick had seen the clouds building to the west all afternoon, dark and heavy, with that greenish tint that meant serious weather. By 6 p.m., the wind had shifted, coming hard and cold, and the sky had gone the color of a bruise. He secured what he could at the construction site, covered his tools with a tarp weighted down with cinder blocks, then retreated to the trailer. The rain started at 7, not gradually, but all at once, like someone had opened a faucet in the sky. It hammered the metal roof so loud Rick couldn't hear himself think. The wind hit next, gusts that made the whole trailer shudder on its blocks. He sat on the mattress and waited it out, used to high basin weather, knowing it would pass. Then he heard the tearing sound. The roof peeled back like someone opening a can. One section, maybe 4 feet square, just lifted and disappeared into the dark. Rain poured through the gap, instant and complete. Water hit the hot plate and shorted it out with a pop and a flash. The overhead light died. Rick grabbed what he could, the duffel bag with his clothes, his father's toolbox, the coffee can where he kept his remaining cash, and ran for the truck. The storm lasted 2 more hours. Rick sat in the pickup cab, engine off to save gas, and watched his temporary home disintegrate. The wind tore more of the roof away. The windows on the west side shattered. By the time the rain stopped, the trailer was uninhabitable. When dawn came, grey and cool in the storm's wake, Rick surveyed the damage. Everything inside was soaked. The mattress, the few pieces of furniture, his spare boots, the hot plate, all of it ruined. The trailer itself was a total loss. The frame twisted, the roof mostly gone. He had nowhere to live. Rick sat in the truck bed, feet dangling, and felt the last of his reserves drain away. He'd been holding on through pure stubbornness, telling himself that as long as he kept moving forward, as long as he kept building, things would eventually turn around. But this felt like the universe delivering a message. Stop. You're done. Accept it. He stayed there until the sun was fully up, until the heat started building again, until he ran out of reasons not to drive into town. Paulette found him in the diner parking lot at 6:30 a.m., asleep in the truck cab, dried mud on his boots, and defeat written across his face. She knocked on the window. "Rick, come inside." He followed her in, too tired to argue. The diner was empty, too early even for the breakfast crowd. Paulette pointed him to the back booth, poured coffee, brought him eggs, and toast he hadn't ordered and probably couldn't pay for. "Storm hit you?" Rick nodded. Explained about the trailer, about having nowhere to go. Paulette listened without interrupting, the way she did. When he finished, she refilled his coffee and sat down across from him. "What are you building out there, Rick?" "Really?" He'd told people it was a community center, but he'd never explained why, never shared the whole vision. Maybe because he didn't think anyone would care. Maybe because speaking it out loud felt like inviting more judgment. But sitting there in Paulette's diner, homeless and exhausted and out of options, Rick found himself talking. He told her about the Fellowship Hall design from 2003. about how he'd imagined it as a space where people could gather, learn skills, share meals, find support, about how the town had changed over the years, how the mill closing had hurt families, how there were people struggling who needed something more than charity. They needed purpose, community, a place that reminded them they still mattered. He told her he was building it from memory, adapting it as he went, that he planned to include a commercial kitchen for community meals, a workshop area for job training, meeting rooms for counseling or support groups, that he had no money and no materials and no help, but he was going to build it anyway because it was the only thing left that made sense. When he finished, Paulette was quiet for a long moment. "You're going to need materials," she finally said. "I'm scrounging what I can. Salvage yards, demolition sites, trading labor when I can. And you're sleeping in your truck now." Rick shrugged. "For now." Paulette stood up, refilled his coffee again. "People need to know about this. The real story. Not just that Rick's building something, but why. I'm not looking for publicity. I know. But maybe you should be. This town," she paused, choosing words carefully. "This town has forgotten how to help each other. Everyone's so busy protecting what they have, they've stopped seeing what we could be. You're showing them something different, whether they want to see it or not." Word spread fast in Bridges Crossing. By noon, half the town knew about the storm, the destroyed trailer, Rick sleeping in his truck. By evening, they knew about the community center, about Rick's vision, about what he was trying to build and why. The reactions were predictable. Some people felt sorry for him. Some thought he was crazy. Some admired the gesture but doubted the execution. Vernon Ames was neither sympathetic nor admiring. He found Rick at the construction site the next afternoon. Rick was back at work despite having slept in the truck again, despite the exhaustion that made his hands shake. He was cleaning up storm debris, salvaging what lumber he could from the destroyed trailer. Vernon's truck pulled up, and the older man got out, his face set in hard lines. "You're making a spectacle of yourself," Vernon said without preamble. Rick straightened, wiped sweat from his forehead. "I'm building something the town needs." "You're building a monument to your own failure. You think people don't see that? You think anyone's going to use a building put up by a man who couldn't keep his own business afloat?" The words hit exactly where Vernon intended. Rick felt the old shame rise up, hot and familiar. But underneath it, something else stirred, something harder. "Maybe you're right," Rick said quietly. "Maybe this is about my failure. But it's also about what comes after, about whether a man gets to try again, gets to offer something even when he's got nothing left to lose. This is a publicity stunt. You're trying to rebuild your reputation on the backs of people's sympathy." "I'm not building it for you, Vernon." Rick's voice stayed level, calm. "I'm building it because I can, because these hands still work, and this knowledge is still good, and this town needs something I can provide. You don't have to believe in it. You don't have to help, but you don't get to tell me to stop." Vernon stared at him for a long moment, jaw working like he wanted to say more. Finally, he shook his head. "You're going to fail. Again. And this time, everyone's going to watch." He got back in his truck and drove away. Rick stood there in the dust and heat, Vernon's words echoing. Then he picked up his level, checked the foundation one more time, and started planning the next phase. That night, sleeping in the truck cab with his head on the bundled duffel bag, Rick pulled out his phone. He scrolled to Tyler's number, the one he'd called dozens of times over the past year, always getting voicemail, always leaving messages that went unanswered. This time, he didn't call. Instead, he opened a social media app he barely knew how to use and searched for his son's name. Tyler's profile came up. The photo showed a confident young man in architect's clothing, standing in front of a modern glass building. Recent posts about projects, design philosophy, sustainability, a life Rick wasn't part of. But Tyler's location settings were public. Denver. Still there. Still doing well. Rick closed the app and stared out at the foundation, barely visible in the darkness. Tyler was watching, somehow, Rick didn't know how he knew, but he knew. The story was spreading online, the way. Everything did now. The bankrupt contractor building a community center with nothing. It was the kind of thing people shared. His son would see it eventually, if he hadn't already. Rick just didn't know if Tyler would care. Rick spent the next 2 weeks living in his truck and scrounging materials like a prospector panning for gold. He drove to every salvage yard within 50 miles, walked demolition sites with a notebook, traded labor for lumber and hardware. A retired contractor cleaning out his garage gave Rick 3 boxes of screws and nails. A widow whose husband had been a carpenter let Rick haul away everything from the workshop. A barn collapse on the Patterson Ranch yielded enough 2x4s for framing, weathered but still sound. Every piece of material was a small victory. Every donation felt like permission to keep going. The work itself became meditation, measuring, cutting, fitting, securing, the ancient rhythm of construction that hadn't changed in centuries. Rick worked alone, but the solitude felt different now, less like abandonment, more like focus. His body protested the pace. 54 wasn't 25. His shoulders burned by mid-morning. His lower back seized up when he stood too quickly. The arthritis in his hands, dormant for years, flared up in his right thumb and wrist. At night in the truck, he'd ice his joints with bags from the gas station, then lie awake feeling every injury announce itself. But he kept going. Paulette brought him lunch most days. She'd appear around noon with sandwiches and lemonade, sit on an overturned bucket, and keep him company while he ate. She didn't talk much about the project itself, didn't offer opinions on his methods or timeline. Instead, she told him about the diner, about customers, about the small dramas that made up life in Bridges Crossing. One afternoon, she told him about her husband. Phil died on a Tuesday, she said, looking out across the flat land. Heart attack, while he was restocking the pie case. Just dropped, gone before the ambulance arrived. Rick had heard the story before, but he listened. I almost sold the diner. Couldn't imagine running it alone. Couldn't imagine going in there every day without him. But then I thought, what else would I do? Sit home and feel sorry for myself? At least the diner was something. At least it was useful. She turned to look at Rick. 5 years later, I'm still there. Some days it feels like all I'm doing is serving coffee and eggs to the same people having the same conversations. But other days, someone comes in who really needs that coffee, really needs to sit somewhere warm and safe for an hour. Those days, I remember why I kept going. Rick understood what she wasn't saying directly. That purpose didn't have to be grand. That showing up and doing the work was enough. Thank you, he said, for the lunches, for everything. Paulette stood up, brushed dust from her jeans. You're doing something good here, Rick, even if nobody else sees it yet. The first sign that someone else might be seeing it came on a Wednesday morning. Rick was marking measurements for the floor joists when he noticed a truck parked on the road, about 50 yards back. It had been there for 20 minutes, just sitting, watching. When Rick glanced up again an hour later, the truck was still there. Finally, around 10 it pulled forward and parked near the foundation. An older man got out, moving slowly, favoring his left leg. Rick recognized him. Bridger Walsh, retired welder, kept to himself mostly, lived alone on the north edge of town. Bridger was 67, lean and weathered, with white hair and hands scarred from decades of metalwork. He'd lost his wife to cancer 10 years back, and as far as Rick knew, the man barely spoke to anyone anymore. Bridger walked up to the foundation, looked at Rick's work without comment, then walked the perimeter slowly, examining the concrete blocks, the rebar placement, the mortar joints. Rick waited, unsure what this inspection meant. Good work, Bridger finally said. His voice was rough from disuse. Square corners, level courses, you know what you're doing. Thank you. What's it going to be? Rick explained. The community center, the fellowship hall design, the plans for workshops and meals and gathering space. Bridger listened, nodding occasionally. When Rick finished, the older man looked out at the empty land, as if visualizing the completed structure. "You doing this alone?" "So far." Bridger nodded again, said nothing more, and walked back to his truck. Rick figured that was the end of it. Another curious observer, nothing more. But Bridger came back the next day, and the day after that. He didn't offer to help, just parked his truck, got out, and watched Rick work for an hour or two before leaving. On the fourth day, Rick was struggling to position a heavy beam for the floor frame. The wood was 16 feet long and waterlogged from sitting outside, probably weighed close to 100 pounds. Rick tried to muscle it into place alone, but his grip failed and the beam crashed down, nearly catching his foot. He stood there, breathing hard, hands shaking from the effort. Bridger's truck door opened. The old welder walked over, bent down, grabbed one end of the beam without a word. Together, they lifted it into place and secured it. "Need to let the wood dry before you frame with it," Bridger said. "Otherwise it'll warp when it cures. Don't have time to wait for it to dry. Then you'll have a warped frame." Rick looked at the old man. He saw something familiar in his eyes. The need to be useful. The desire to build something that mattered. "You know welding," Rick said. 40 years of it. I'm going to need steel supports for the roof trusses, I-beams, welded joins. I've got no money to pay anyone." Bridger was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'll come back tomorrow. Bring my gear." He did. Showed up at 7 a.m. with a portable welding rig in the truck bed and safety equipment that had seen decades of use. He didn't make small talk, didn't explain why he'd decided to help, just set up his equipment and got to work. Rick understood. Some men didn't need words to explain themselves. With Bridger's help, the work accelerated. The floor frame went in properly, joists spaced at 16 inches, cross-bracing for stability. Rick found plywood for the subfloor at a demolition site in the next county, spent a full day hauling it back in multiple trips. During this time, Rick made another discovery that nearly broke him. He was reorganizing his tools one evening, checking inventory, when he found something at the bottom of his father's old toolbox. A small canvas apron, child-sized, with Tyler written in faded marker on the bib. Rick remembered buying it for his son's 8th birthday. Tyler had wanted to be a builder like his dad, had worn that apron to every job site Rick brought him to. He'd been so proud of it, so serious about carrying his own small hammer and tape measure. Rick sat in the truck bed, holding the tiny apron, and felt the full weight of what he'd lost. Not just money or reputation, but time. Years he couldn't recover. A relationship that might be beyond repair. He tried Tyler's number again that night. Got voicemail, as always. This time, he left a message. "Tyler, it's your dad. I know you don't want to talk to me, and I understand why. I failed you. I failed your mother. I failed the business, failed the people who trusted me. But I'm trying to build something now, something good. Not for money, not for reputation. Just because I can, and because it needs doing. I found your old apron today, the one from when you were 8. You remember that? You wore it everywhere. You were so proud to be helping. I was proud too. Proudest I've ever been. I wish." The voicemail cut him off. 30 seconds, the limit. Rick sat there in the dark, phone in his hand, and wondered if Tyler would even listen to it. 3 days later, Rick was installing the floor decking when he noticed something at the salvage yard in town. A brass bell, tarnished green with age, sitting in a pile of scrap metal destined for recycling. It came from a Baptist church that had been demolished the previous month. The building was over 100 years old, finally condemned due to foundation damage. Everything inside had been sold off or scrapped. The bell was 2 feet tall, cast iron with brass plating, with an inscription around the rim. "Let all who hear gather in fellowship." Rick picked it up, felt its weight. imagined its voice. He approached the salvage yard owner, a man named Preston who'd known Rick in better days. "How much for the bell?" Preston looked at it, at Rick, then back at the bell. "That thing's going for scrap weight, maybe $30. "I don't have $30, but I can work. 2 days labor, whatever you need. Cleaning, hauling, sorting. You keep the bell. Aside. I'll earn it." Preston considered this. Finally nodded. 2 full days. Show up on time, work hard. Rick spent the following weekend at the salvage yard, doing the hardest, dirtiest work Preston had. Sorting metal, loading trucks, clearing out a storage shed filled with decades of accumulated junk. His body screamed at him, but he pushed through. At the end of the second day, Preston handed him the bell. "This really matters to you, doesn't it? Whatever you're building out there." "It's all I've got left," Rick said simply. That night, he cleaned the bell in his makeshift camp, using vinegar and steel wool to remove years of tarnish. The brass underneath emerged slowly, glowing warm in the fading light. The sound, when he tested it with a light tap, was clear and resonant, carrying across the empty land. It was a sound that called people together. Rick placed the bell carefully in the truck cab, wrapped in an old blanket. When the building was finished, this bell would hang in the entry. It would announce gatherings, summon community, remind everyone what this place was for. The next morning, Bridger arrived and saw the bell sitting on the tailgate. "Church bell," he said. "Not a question. From the old Baptist building." Bridger ran his hand over the inscription, read the words silently. Then he looked at Rick with something that might have been respect. "You're serious about this?" "I am." Bridger nodded. "Then, we'd better get the walls up before winter." The walls began rising in mid-July, 2 by 6 studs every 16 inches, just like the codes required, even though Rick had no permits, and no inspector would ever check his work. He built it right, because that was the only way he knew how to build. Bridger worked alongside him most days now, their partnership settling into a comfortable rhythm. The old welder didn't talk much, but when he did speak, it was worth hearing. He'd point out a better way to brace a corner, suggest a different approach to a difficult joint. 50 years of building knowledge condensed into occasional quiet observations. Rick came to appreciate the silence between them. It felt like the old days, working with his crew, when men understood each other through the work itself rather than conversation. The town's curiosity was growing. More vehicles slowed down when passing. A few people stopped to look. Most still didn't offer help, but the hostility seemed to be softening into something else. Uncertainty, maybe, or cautious interest. On a Tuesday morning, a woman Rick didn't recognize pulled up in a dusty sedan. She was maybe 49, 50, with tired eyes and work-worn hands. She sat in her car for 10 minutes before finally getting out. Rick was cutting studs, measuring twice and cutting once the way his father had taught him. He noticed her approach but didn't stop working, giving her time to find her words. "You're Rick," she finally said. "I am. I'm Shauna Price." Rick set down his saw, wiped sawdust from his hands. "What can I do for you, Shauna?" She looked at the half-built structure, at the foundation and floor and rising walls. "I heard what you're building. A community center for people who need it." "That's right. I need it." The words came out flat, factual. "Lost my job at the mill when it closed. Been looking for work for 8 months. I've got a daughter in college, loans coming due, and I don't know what I'm going to do." She paused. "I can't pay you anything, but I can work. If you'll teach me." Rick studied her, saw the pride it took to ask, the desperation underneath it. "You ever done construction?" "No, but I can learn. I'm strong, I show up on time, and I don't quit." Bridger had stopped his own work, watching this exchange silently. Rick made a decision. "Be here tomorrow at 7. Wear boots with good tread and bring work gloves if you have them. I'll teach you what I know." Relief washed across Shauna's face. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. The work's hard, and I don't have any shortcuts to offer. I'm not looking for shortcuts." She showed up the next morning at 6:45. Ready. Rick started her on basic carpentry. How to read a tape measure accurately, how to mark a cut line, how to use a circular saw safely, the foundational skills that every builder needed. Shauna absorbed it all, like she was studying for an exam. She asked questions, took notes in a small notebook she carried, practiced measurements until they were exact. When she made mistakes, she didn't get frustrated. She just asked what she'd done wrong and tried again. By the end of the first week, she could cut studs to length within 1/8 of an inch. By the end of the second week, she was helping frame walls. Rick found unexpected satisfaction in teaching again. It reminded him of working with Tyler, of passing knowledge forward, of the way skills moved from one generation to the next, like an inheritance that couldn't be taken away. During lunch breaks, Shauna talked about her daughter. Kendra was 20, studying nursing at the State University 3 hours north. She was the first in their family to attend college. Shauna had worked double shifts at the mill to make it possible, building a future for her daughter even while her own was crumbling. "She wants to quit," Shauna said one afternoon, sitting in the shade of the unfinished walls. "Says she should come home, help me figure things out. But I can't let her do that. This is her chance." "You told her about this?" Rick gestured at the construction. "I did. Told her I'm learning a trade, that maybe I can get work as a carpenter once I know what I'm doing." She smiled, tired but genuine. "She thinks I'm crazy, but at least she's staying in school." The work continued. Walls went up, one section at a time. Window openings were framed. The structure began to look like a building instead of just an idea. Rick's body was holding together through stubbornness and ice packs. His hands had gone beyond pain to a kind of permanent ache he'd learned to ignore. His shoulder made a grinding sound when he lifted heavy loads. But he was sleeping better, even in the truck cab. The exhaustion was clean now, earned. One evening, organizing his tools before dark, Rick realized he still had Tyler's small apron from the toolbox. He'd been carrying it around, unable to put it away, unable to let it go. On impulse, he found a nail and hung the apron on one of the interior wall studs, a small shrine to what had been lost, or maybe a symbol of hope for what might be restored. Bridger saw it the next morning but said nothing. Shauna noticed it too. "Your son's? Long time ago." "You talk to him?" "He doesn't answer." Shauna was quiet for a moment. "My daughter didn't talk to me for a year after her father left. She blamed me, thought I'd driven him away somehow. Finally, she called. Just started talking like no time had passed. Sometimes they need space to figure things out on, of their own." Rick wanted to believe that. Wanted to think Tyler was just working through his anger, that eventually there'd be a call or a message or a moment of reconciliation. But wanting didn't make it true. The heat of late July was brutal. Temperatures pushed past 100 most afternoons, and working became dangerous afternoon. Rick adjusted the schedule, starting at dawn, working until early afternoon, then resting until evening when it cooled enough to continue. During the worst heat, he'd sit in what little shade the structure provided and watch the horizon shimmer. He thought about all the houses he'd built, all the families he'd sheltered, wondered if any of them remembered his name, if the quality of his work had outlasted his reputation. One afternoon during this quiet time, a truck pulled up that Rick didn't recognize. A man got out, early 60s, wearing Carhartt work pants and a faded t-shirt. He carried himself like someone who'd spent a lifetime in physical labor. "You Rick?" "That's right. I'm Dexter Mills, retired electrician. Heard what you're doing out here." He looked at the structure, assessing it with a professional eye. "You're going to need electrical work, wiring, outlets, lighting. I could help with that." Rick stood up slowly, legs stiff from sitting. "I appreciate the offer, but I can't pay you." "Didn't ask for pay. Asked if you needed help." "Why?" Dexter shrugged. Been retired 3 years. Thought I'd enjoy it. Turns out sitting home watching television makes me feel useless. At least this way, I'm building something that matters. It was becoming a pattern. People showing up because they needed purpose as much as Rick did. The project was attracting the overlooked, the forgotten, the ones who still had something to offer, but nowhere to offer it. I'm starting electrical rough-in next week, Rick said. If you're serious, I could use the expertise. I'm serious. Dexter showed up the following Monday with his tools and his knowledge. He walked Rick through the electrical plan, explaining code requirements, best practices, safety considerations. Together, they mapped out circuits, planned outlet placements, determined where the breaker panel would go. The work was collaborative in a way Rick hadn't experienced in years. Not employer and employee, not contractor and client, just skilled people working together towards something bigger than themselves. By early August, the walls were complete and sheathed in plywood. The structure had shape now, presence. You could stand inside and imagine the finished space. The high windows Rick had designed let in beautiful light. The open floor plan felt expansive, despite the modest square footage. People were noticing. The project had become something the town talked about. Opinions remained mixed, but the conversation had shifted from "Why is Rick doing this?" to "What's Rick building out there?" Vernon Ames drove past regularly, always slowing down, always frowning, never stopping. Rick knew the opposition wasn't over. Vernon had too much invested in seeing Rick fail. But for now, the work itself was louder than the criticism. Late one evening, Rick stood alone in the framed building, the setting sun casting long shadows through the studs. He could hear Bridger's truck approaching, the familiar rattle of the old welder's diesel engine. Bridger joined him inside the frame, both men looking at what they'd built so far. "It's going to be good," Bridger said quietly. "When it's finished," Rick nodded. "If we can finish it, we will. Too far along to quit now." "I keep thinking Tyler might," Rick stopped himself. "Give him time," Bridger said. "Some distances take longer to cross than others." They stood there in the fading light, two men who'd found purpose in building something neither of them would own, something that existed purely to serve others. It was enough. The town hall meeting was scheduled for 7 p.m. on a Thursday in mid-August. Rick learned about it from Paulette, who heard it from Francine, the town council secretary. Vernon Ames had filed a formal complaint about unauthorized construction, and the council was obligated to address it publicly. Rick spent the day before the meeting working on the roof trusses with Bridger. The physical labor helped keep his mind from spiraling into worst-case scenarios. The council could shut him down. They could fine him, demand he tear everything down, make an example of what happens when you bypass regulations. "You worried?" Bridger asked, reading Rick's silence. "Should be finished by now. Should have permits, inspections, everything by the book. But I didn't have money for fees, didn't have time to wait for approvals. Just started building. Sometimes the right thing isn't the legal thing. That won't matter if they shut me down." Bridger tightened a bolt on a truss connection. "Then we make them understand why it matters, why this place needs to exist." The community center held maybe 200 people when packed. That night, at least 300 showed up, crowding into the aisles, standing along the walls, spilling out into the hallway. Rick hadn't expected that, hadn't realized how many people were paying attention. Vernon sat in the front row, arms crossed, jaw set. He'd brought supporters, contractors, and business owners who saw Rick's project as either a threat or an embarrassment to professional standards. The council consisted of 5 members, ranging from late 50s to early 70s. The chairwoman was Margaret Talbot, a retired school principal with a reputation for fairness and zero tolerance for nonsense. She called the meeting to order, explained the complaint. Vernon had submitted documentation claiming Rick was constructing a commercial building without permits, without inspections, and without proper zoning approvals. He was requesting the council halt construction immediately and investigate potential violations. Margaret asked Vernon to state his case. Vernon stood, turned to address the crowd rather than just the council. Rick was a good contractor once. I won't deny that. But good intentions don't replace proper procedures. What he's building out there is a commercial structure. It needs permits, needs inspections, needs to meet code. If we let him bypass the rules, we're saying rules don't matter. That anyone can build anything, consequences be damned. Some people nodded. Vernon's argument had logic to it. Furthermore, Vernon continued, this project reflects poorly on our professional community. Rick's financial failures are well documented. Now he's trying to rebuild his reputation by constructing a building he can't afford, using questionable methods, appealing to people's sympathy rather than their judgment. It's irresponsible, and it needs to stop. Vernon sat down to scattered applause. Margaret looked at Rick. Mr. Calder, would you like to respond? Rick stood slowly. Public speaking had never been his strength. He was better with his hands than his words, but he'd promised himself he'd be honest, that he'd tell them exactly why this mattered. Everything Vernon said about permits and procedures is true. I should have gotten approval before starting. I should have followed the process, but I didn't have money for permit fees, didn't have time to wait months for approvals, and I knew that if I asked permission, I'd probably be denied, so I started building. He paused, gathered his thoughts. This town needs a gathering place, somewhere people can learn skills, share meals, find support. The mill closing hurt a lot of families. The church consolidations left some folks without community, and there's people like me, who fell down and can't seem to get back up, who just need somewhere to exist without judgment. Rick looked directly at Vernon. I failed. My business collapsed. I lost everything. That's all true. But I still know how to build, and I can still offer something of value. This center isn't about rebuilding my reputation. It's about creating something this town needs, something I can provide, even with nothing in my pockets. He turned back to the council. I'm building it right. Every wall is square, every joint is sound. When it's done, it'll be safe and solid and it'll last. I'll submit to any inspection you want. I'll pay whatever fines you levy. But please don't make me tear it down, not when it's this close to being something that can help people. Rick sat down. His hands were shaking. Margaret asked if anyone else wanted to speak. Paulette stood up. She didn't walk to the front, just spoke from where she was in the third row. I've known Rick for 30 years, served him coffee in my diner for all of them. I watched him build his business from nothing, watched it collapse through no real fault of his own. I've also watched him these past months, working alone in 100-degree heat, sleeping in his truck, building something he'll never profit from. That's not a man trying to rebuild his reputation. That's a man trying to redeem himself through service. Bridger stood next. I'm 73 years old, retired 10 years, haven't felt useful since. Then I saw what Rick was doing, and I remembered what it feels like to build something that matters. I've checked his work, its quality, better than half the commercial buildings in this county. Shauna stood, visibly nervous. I lost my job 8 months ago. Been applying everywhere, getting nowhere. Rick taught me carpentry, taught me for free, with patience, because he believes in passing knowledge forward. That building out there gave me hope when I had none. It gave me skills I can use to support my family. Please, don't take that away. One by one, others stood. Dexter talked about finding purpose in retirement. A rancher spoke about watching Rick work through summer storms and brutal heat, never quitting. A woman from the library mentioned how the town had been talking about needing a community space for years, but never found funding. Vernon sat rigid, arms still crossed, but his certainty seemed to be cracking. Finally, Margaret called for council discussion. They debated for 20 minutes, while the crowd waited. The arguments went back and forth, regulations versus need, procedure versus pragmatism, risk versus reward. When they voted, it was 3-2 in Rick's favor. The council would grant him temporary permission to continue construction pending proper inspections. He'd need to apply for retroactive permits, pay standard fees plus a late filing penalty, and submit to a full code inspection before the building could be occupied. But they wouldn't make him tear it down. The relief hit Rick like a wave. He'd been holding his breath without realizing it. After the meeting, people surrounded him. Some offered congratulations, some pledged materials or labor, some just wanted to shake his hand. Vernon left without speaking to anyone. Rick walked out into the August night with Paulette, Bridger, and Shauna. They stood in the parking lot, processing what had just happened. "You won," Paulette said. "We won," Rick corrected. "That wasn't me in there. That was all of you. Still have to pay the fees," Bridger noted. "That won't be cheap." Rick hadn't thought about that part. He didn't have money for retroactive permits and penalties. But he'd figure it out. He always did. Back at the construction site that night, Rick couldn't sleep. He sat in the truck cab, windows down, listening to the night sounds of the high basin. Crickets and distant coyotes and wind through dry grass. His phone buzzed. A text message from a number he didn't recognize. "Saw the news coverage of tonight's meeting. Proud of what you're building." Rick stared at the message, heart pounding. Tyler, his son, had been watching, had seen the meeting, had reached out. Just 4 words beyond the signature, but they meant everything. Rick typed back, "Thank you. I hope someday you'll see it in person." He waited, but no response came. Still, it was more than he'd had yesterday. It was a door opened slightly, light showing through the crack. The next morning, Rick started a notebook. The ledger, he called it. He wrote down every person who'd helped, every donation of time or material, every act of support. Paulette's lunches, Bridger's welding, Shauna's labor, Dexter's electrical expertise, the rancher who'd donated lumber, the woman who'd given him her late husband's tools. The list grew longer than he'd expected. The project wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to everyone whose name filled those pages. By late August, the roof trusses were up and sheathed. The building was weatherproofed, protected from the fall rains that would come soon. Electrical rough-in was complete, plumbing roughed in for the kitchen and bathrooms. The structure had bones and skin now, just needed its organs and finishing touches. Regional newspapers picked up the story. Small-town contractor builds community center from nothing. Human interest angle with photographs of the construction site, of Rick working alongside volunteers. The attention brought more donations, more offers of help. A roofing company 2 counties over donated shingles. A plumbing supply warehouse contributed fixtures for the bathrooms. Momentum was building in ways Rick hadn't imagined, but Vernon hadn't given up. Rick heard through Paulette that Vernon was digging into property records, looking for any possible violation. Boundary disputes, easement issues, anything that might stop the project through legal rather than political means. Rick hired a surveyor with money borrowed from Paulette, $300 he'd pay back somehow, someday. The surveyor spent a full day checking property lines, reviewing deeds, examining historical records. The results came back clean. Rick's property boundaries were exactly where he thought they were. No encroachment, no easement violations. The building sat entirely on his 5 acres, with plenty of clearance from property lines. When Rick showed Vernon the survey results, the older contractor just stared at the documents, then walked away without comment. That night, Rick found the old photograph of himself and Tyler, the one from when Tyler was 8, both of them on a job site, both wearing tool belts, smiling at the camera. Rick's ex-wife had taken that photo. It captured a moment when everything still felt possible, when the future stretched out clean and bright. Rick framed the photograph in a simple wooden frame he built himself, hung it on the interior wall of the community center, right next to where Tyler's small canvas apron still hung, a shrine to what was lost and a declaration of hope for what might still be rebuilt. September brought cooler mornings and the first hints of autumn. The cottonwoods along the creek bed started turning yellow, and the air carried that particular sharpness that meant summer was finally releasing its grip on the high basin. Rick's health was deteriorating in ways he could no longer ignore. The pain in his hands had progressed beyond arthritis into something more serious. His right shoulder wouldn't rotate fully anymore. Some mornings, he could barely grip a hammer. He wrapped his hands in athletic tape, took ibuprofen like it was candy, and kept working. The building was 70% complete. Interior walls were going up, dividing the open space into functional areas. A commercial kitchen was taking shape on the west side, donated equipment waiting to be installed. Meeting rooms lined the east wall. The central gathering space remained open, high-ceilinged, full of light from the windows Rick had positioned so carefully. It was starting to look like the vision he'd carried in his head all these months. More volunteers showed up as word spread. A retired teacher named Gwen offered to organize a library of donated books. An unemployed mechanic named Luther helped with the HVAC installation. A former librarian, Patricia, began documenting the construction process with photographs, creating an archive of how the building came to be. The project had taken on its own life, growing beyond Rick's control in the best possible way. One morning in mid-September, Rick collapsed. He'd been installing drywall, lifting sheets overhead to screw them to the ceiling joists. The physical position was demanding, arms extended, neck craned back, whole body supporting the weight. He'd done it 1,000 times before, but this time his vision went grey at the edges. His legs buckled, and he went down hard. Shauna found him on the concrete floor, conscious but unable to stand. She called Bridger, who arrived in minutes. Together they loaded Rick into Bridger's truck and drove him to the clinic in town. The doctor was a woman in her 50s named Dr. Hastings. She'd treated Rick before, knew his situation. She ran tests, checked his blood pressure, examined his hands and shoulder. Dehydration, exhaustion, and you're pushing a body that's already under severe stress, she said bluntly. Your blood pressure is dangerously high. The inflammation in your hands could lead to permanent damage if you don't rest. And that shoulder needs imaging, probably physical therapy. I don't have time to rest. Then you'll end up in the hospital, or worse. Doctor. Hastings pulled up a stool, sat so she was at eye level with Rick. I know what you're building. I know why it matters. But you're no good to that project if you're dead. 3 days minimum rest, no lifting, no construction. Just recovery. Rick wanted to argue, but the grey edges were still hovering in his vision. His body was delivering its own verdict. Paulette picked him up from the clinic, drove him back to the construction site. Rick had been sleeping in the building now that it was weatherproofed, a sleeping bag on the plywood floor, more comfortable than the truck, but still far from luxury. You're staying with me, Paulette said. Not a question. I can't. You can, and you will. I've got a spare room. You'll eat proper meals, sleep in a real bed, and not lift a finger for 3 days. Then you can go back to killing yourself, if that's what you're determined to do. Rick was too tired to argue. Paulette's house was a small ranch style on the quiet end of Main Street. Her late husband had built it in the 80s, solid construction with a wraparound porch and a yard full of mature trees. She showed Rick to the spare bedroom, pointed out the bathroom, then went to fix dinner while he slept. He woke up 12 hours later to the smell of coffee and bacon. The 3-day rest felt like punishment at first. Rick sat on Paulette's porch, watching the season change, knowing work was continuing without him. Bridger texted updates. Shauna and Dexter were installing drywall, Luther was finishing the HVAC ducts, Gwen was organizing the library space. The project was moving forward, without him. On the second day, Paulette sat with him on the porch, both of them drinking coffee as morning turned to afternoon. You're not used to letting go, she observed. Spent my whole life being the one in charge, making decisions, solving problems, carrying responsibility. And now, you've built something bigger than you can control alone. That scares you, Rick nodded. What if they don't need me anymore? They'll always need you, but maybe not the way you think. Paulette refilled his coffee. My husband used to say that the mark of good work was when it could continue without you. When you'd built something strong enough to stand on its own. I wanted to prove I still mattered. You have, but not by being indispensable, by showing people what they're capable of when someone believes in them. On the third day, Rick's phone rang. Tyler's number. Rick answered, heart racing. Hello, Dad. Tyler's voice, cautious but present. How are you? I'm okay, recovering from pushing too hard. I heard. Shauna posted about it online. Said you collapsed. I'm fine now, just needed rest. A long pause. Then, I've been following the project, everything you're doing, the whole story. I know. Thank you for your text. It meant, Rick's voice caught. It meant everything. I should have called sooner, should have reached out months ago. But I was angry and hurt, and I didn't know how to get past it. You had every right to be angry. But I've watched you build this center, watched the community rally around you, and I realized something. You weren't just building a structure. You were rebuilding yourself. And instead of supporting that, I was holding on to old resentments. Rick stood up, walked to the edge of the porch. Paulette discreetly went inside, giving him privacy. I failed you, Rick said quietly. As a father, as a provider, I got lost in work, in ambition, and I didn't see what was falling apart at home. Then when the business collapsed, I was so ashamed I couldn't face you. I know, Dad. I understand that now. Seeing what you're doing, how you're helping people, teaching them, giving them purpose, that's who you always were. I just couldn't see it through my own pain. They talked for an hour, not about the past, not rehashing old wounds, but about the present. Tyler asked detailed questions about the construction, about the design choices, about how Rick had adapted the original fellowship hall plans. Professional curiosity mixed with genuine interest. Before they hung up, Tyler said something that nearly broke Rick. I'd like to visit. In a couple weeks when I can get away. See what you've built. If that's okay. More than okay, I'd like that very much. After the call, Rick sat on Paulette's porch and cried, not from sadness, but from relief. The distance between him and his son was still there, but it was shrinking. They were finding their way back to each other. When Rick returned to the construction site on the fourth day, he found the volunteers had accomplished more than he'd imagined. The drywall was nearly complete. The kitchen equipment was installed. The bathrooms had fixtures and tile. The building was transforming from construction site to functional space. Bridger met him at the entrance. We kept working. I can see that. Thank you. Learned it from you. Just keep moving forward. That evening, as the sun set and volunteers headed home, Rick stood alone in the nearly completed building. The light came through the windows at a perfect angle, illuminating the open gathering space. He could imagine it full of people, hear the conversations, feel the warmth of community. He walked to the wall, where Tyler's photograph and childhood apron hung, pulled out his phone and took a picture of the shrine. Sent it to Tyler with a simple message. This is where I work every day. It reminds me what I'm building. 4. Tyler's response came quickly. Can't wait to see it in person. 2 weeks. I promise. Rick saved the message, read it 3 more times, then got back to work. Vernon drove past that evening, slowing as he always did. But this time, he pulled over, got out of his truck, and walked onto the property. Rick tensed, expecting confrontation. Vernon looked at the building, walked the perimeter slowly. When he came back, his expression was unreadable. It's good work, he finally said. Better than I expected. Thank you. I've been... Vernon stopped, started again. 20 years ago, I had a chance to expand my business, build something bigger, hire more people, really make a mark. I was scared of failing, of losing what I had. So I played it safe, stayed small, and I've regretted it every day since. He looked at Rick directly. When I saw you building this after losing everything, it reminded me of my own cowardice. That's why I fought you. Not because you were wrong, but because you were brave and I wasn't. Vernon reached into his truck, pulled out an envelope. This is a donation, for materials, for permits, whatever you need. It's not much, but it's something. Rick opened the envelope. $500. Vernon, I can't. You can. And you will, because this town needs what you're building, and I should have been helping from the start instead of trying to tear it down. Vernon walked back to his truck, paused before getting in. I'm sorry, Rick, for everything. Then he drove away, leaving Rick standing there with an envelope of cash and the understanding that redemption wasn't just for him. It was available to anyone willing to reach for it. The building was 80% complete when the courier arrived on a Thursday morning in late September. Rick was working on interior trim, measuring baseboard for the main gathering room, when a delivery truck pulled up to the site. A young man in a uniform got out, carrying a large envelope. Rick, Calder? That's me. Sign here, please. Rick signed, took the envelope. It was thick, official-looking, with a Denver return address he didn't recognize. He assumed it was something about permits or inspections, more bureaucracy to navigate. He waited until his lunch break to open it, sat in the shade of the building, the September sun, still warm despite the changing season, and pulled out the contents. The first thing he saw was an architectural drawing, professional, CAD-rendered, stamped with an architect's seal, a workshop and training facility designed to complement the community center. Modern lines meeting traditional construction, sustainable materials, classroom spaces, and hands-on work areas. Rick's hands started shaking as he looked through the pages. Detailed floor plans, elevation drawings, material specifications. This was serious work, months of design condensed into a comprehensive set of plans. Then he found the property deed. 5 acres adjacent to his land, a parcel immediately to the north. Recently purchased. The buyer's name made his breath catch. Tyler Calder. There was a letter, handwritten on Tyler's architectural firm letterhead. Rick had to read it 3 times before the words fully registered. Dad, I've been watching what you're doing from a distance, and I've been wrong to stay away. Wrong to let anger and pride keep me from supporting something this important. You've been building more than a community center out there. You've been building bridges, giving people purpose, showing them that failure isn't final. I want to be part of that. I want to contribute in the way I know best. I've purchased the adjacent property and designed a vocational training workshop to complement your community center. My firm will handle the construction costs. What I need from you is something more valuable than money. I need your expertise, your traditional craftsmanship, your knowledge of how things should be built to last. I want us to build this together, father and son, combining our different approaches into something neither of us could create alone. I know I have no right to ask after the silence I've maintained. But I'm asking anyway. Will you work with me on this? I'll be there in 2 weeks, as promised. We can walk both sides together and start planning. I love you, Dad. I should have said that a long time ago. Rick sat there for a long time, the letter trembling in his hands. The magnitude of what Tyler had done was staggering. Not just the financial investment of buying land, but the emotional investment of reaching out, of making himself vulnerable, of offering partnership instead of judgment. Tears came, hot and unexpected. Rick let them fall. Paulette found him 20 minutes later, still sitting there, the plans spread around him. Rick, what's wrong? He couldn't speak, just handed her the letter. She read it slowly, her expression softening with each line. When she finished, she looked at Rick with tears in her own eyes. Your boy loves you. I don't deserve this. Maybe not. but that's not how love works. It's not about deserving. She sat down beside him. He's offering you a partnership, a way forward together. Are you going to accept it? I don't know how to. Rick stopped, overwhelmed. I've failed him so many times. And now he's giving you a chance to do better, to build something together instead of apart. That's grace, Rick. Don't waste it. Rick called Tyler that afternoon. His son answered on the second ring. You got it, Tyler said. Not a question. I did. Tyler, I don't know what to say. It's what should have happened months ago. I should have been there from the beginning. You're here now. That's what matters. Rick looked at the architectural drawings spread across the plywood floor. These plans are brilliant. The design, the sustainability features, the way it connects to what I'm building, it's exactly right. I wanted it to honor both approaches, your traditional craftsmanship and my modern techniques. Show that both have value, that they can work together. They talked for 2 hours about the workshop design, about construction timelines, about how they'd coordinate the two buildings. But underneath the practical discussion was something deeper, a father and son finding their way back to each other through the language they both spoke best, building. That evening, Rick gathered the volunteers who'd become the project's core team. Paulette, Bridger, Shauna, Dexter, Luther, Gwen, Patricia. He showed them the plans, explained what Tyler was proposing. The reaction was overwhelming. Excitement, joy, validation that what they'd been building mattered enough to attract this kind of investment and partnership. Your son's an architect? Shauna asked, looking at the detailed drawings with awe. A good one. Better than I ever was. He learned from you, Bridger said quietly. Everything worth knowing about. Integrity and quality. He just took it further. Word spread through Bridger's crossing that night. The bankrupt contractor's son, the successful architect from Denver, was partnering with his father on an expansion project. It was the kind of story the town would talk about for years. Vernon appeared the next morning. Rick was reviewing the workshop plans when Vernon's truck pulled up. The older contractor got out slowly, moving like he'd made a difficult decision and was seeing it through despite discomfort. Heard about your son, Vernon said. News travels fast. It's a small town. Vernon looked at the plans Rick had spread on a makeshift table. May I? Rick gestured permission. Vernon studied the drawings with a professional eye, nodding occasionally. Good design, smart use of space. Your boy knows what he's doing. He does. Vernon was quiet for a moment. Then, I've been thinking about what I said last week, about regret, about chances I didn't take. This workshop, you're going to need materials, labor, expertise. My company could contribute, not as charity, but as investment in what this will become. Rick studied the man who'd been his rival for 2 decades, his opponent during the town hall battle, his critic throughout this entire project. Why the change, Vernon? Because I'm tired of being angry, tired of competing when I should be collaborating. And because... He paused, choosing words carefully. My own son doesn't speak to me. Left town 15 years ago, never came back. I watched your relationship break and thought, at least Rick lost his son the same way I lost mine. Gave me comfort in my own failure. Vernon's voice roughened. But you're getting him back. You're building bridges I never bothered to build. And maybe if I help with this, maybe if I contribute to something good instead of tearing it down, I can learn something about redemption before it's too late. Rick extended his hand. Vernon took it. We could use your help, Rick said. Both projects, your expertise, your crew, your resources. You'll have them. After Vernon left, Rick walked through the nearly completed community center. The walls were painted now, soft colors that made the space feel warm. The kitchen was functional, appliances installed and ready. The meeting rooms had tables and chairs donated by various community members. The library space had shelves built by Bridger, already filling with books Gwen had collected. It was real. It was happening. and now it was expanding beyond anything Rick had imagined. He stood at the wall where Tyler's photograph and childhood apron hung. In 2 weeks, his son would be here. They'd walk this building together, then cross to the adjacent property and plan the workshop. Father and son, building something that neither could build alone. Rick pulled out his phone, took another picture of the shrine, sent it to Tyler with a message. "This has kept me going, but having you here will mean more than you." "No." Tyler's response, "I'm counting the days." That night, Rick updated his ledger, added new names, new contributions, new partnerships formed. The list had grown to fill dozens of pages. What had started as one man working alone had become a community effort, proof that shared purpose could overcome individual limitation. The next morning, Bridger arrived with something wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it carefully, a large stone, polished granite, with an inscription engraved across its face. "Built by many, for all, and the date. Cornerstone for the workshop," Bridger explained. "You and Tyler should lay it together. Start the new building the right way." Rick ran his fingers over the engraving, feeling the depth of the carved letters. This stone would outlast all of them, would tell future generations about what happened here, about how a community came together to build something that mattered. "It's perfect," Rick said. "Thank you." "Thank you," Bridger replied, reminding an old man what it feels like to matter. Rick looked at the community center, at the empty land where the workshop would rise, at the horizon stretching endless and full of possibility. 2 weeks until Tyler arrived. 2 weeks until they laid this cornerstone together. 2 weeks until the next chapter of this story began. He got back to work, but everything felt different now, lighter, full of hope instead of desperation. He wasn't building alone anymore, and he never would be again. The 2 weeks before Tyler's arrival passed in a blur of focused work. Rick pushed to complete every detail of the community center, wanting his son to see the finished vision rather than a work in progress. The volunteers felt the urgency and matched his pace. The interior painting was completed by Shauna and Gwen, who discovered an unexpected talent for precision work. The trim went up, baseboards and crown molding that Rick cut and fit with the same care he'd given to million-dollar homes in his prime. Dexter finished the electrical, testing every outlet and switch, making sure everything met code. Luther installed the final HVAC vents, ensuring the building could be heated through the coming winter. Patricia continued documenting everything, her camera capturing the transformation from construction site to functional community space. The commercial kitchen gleamed with donated equipment, a 6-burner stove, double ovens, a commercial refrigerator, stainless steel prep tables. Everything needed to prepare meals for 100 people or more. Gwen organized the library, arranging books by category, creating a lending system using an old card catalog someone had salvaged from the demolished elementary school. The meeting rooms had whiteboards, tables, chairs, space for job training workshops, support groups, tutoring, whatever the community needed. The central gathering area remained open, exactly as Rick had envisioned, with windows that filled the space with morning light. On the Thursday before Tyler's arrival, the town organized a soft opening, not the formal dedication ceremony, which would wait until the workshop was also complete, but a quiet gathering to show people what had been built and what it would offer. Over 100 people came. They walked through slowly, touching walls, testing chairs, standing in the kitchen and imagining the meals that would be prepared there. The reactions were mostly silent, reverent, as if they'd entered a sacred space. Because, in a way, they had. Every volunteer had poured their hope into this building. Every donor had invested their faith in what it could become. It was more than construction. It was tangible proof that community still mattered, that people could still come together and create something meaningful. Vernon walked through with his wife Martha, a quiet woman Rick had rarely spoken to. She stopped at the library, ran her fingers along the shelves, then turned to Rick with tears in her eyes. "This is what we've needed," she said simply. "Thank you." Vernon stood beside her, nodding, his earlier opposition completely dissolved. Mayor Talbot gave a brief speech, thanking Rick and all the volunteers, acknowledging what had been accomplished. She announced that the formal dedication ceremony would take place in 3 weeks, giving time for the workshop groundbreaking to happen first. After people left, Rick stood alone in the empty building. The silence felt different now, not lonely, but peaceful, complete. Paulette found him there as sunset painted the windows, orange and gold. "You did it," she said. "We did it." "No, Rick. This started with you. One man, one foundation, one crazy dream. The rest of us just helped you build it. I couldn't have done it without. I know, but you had the courage to start. That's what mattered. Everything else followed from that first decision to keep building, even when everyone thought you were finished." They locked up together, Rick, turning off lights one by one, already thinking about tomorrow when Tyler would arrive. That night, Rick didn't sleep in the building. He'd moved back into Paulette's spare room by mutual agreement. She'd insisted he needed proper rest before his son's visit, and Rick had been too grateful to argue. He lay awake reviewing everything. The community center was finished. The adjacent property was cleared and ready for construction. Bridger's cornerstone waited in the back of Rick's truck, wrapped carefully in blankets. The architectural plans were organized, permits secured, materials ordered. Everything was ready, everything except Rick himself. What would he say to Tyler? How did you bridge 15 years of silence in a single conversation? How did you acknowledge failure without drowning in it? How did you accept grace without diminishing it? His phone buzzed. Tyler. "Landing at 3 p.m. tomorrow. I'll rent a car and drive straight to Bridger's Crossing. Can we meet at the site?" Rick typed back, "I'll be there. Can't wait to see you." Tyler. "Me too, Dad. Me too." Friday morning arrived clear and cold, the first real hint of autumn in the air. Rick was at the community center by dawn, walking through one final time, checking every detail. He wanted it perfect. Wanted Tyler to see not just what he'd built, but why it mattered. Bridger arrived at 8, followed by Shauna, then Dexter. They'd all come to meet Tyler, to be there for this moment. "You nervous?" Bridger asked. "Terrified. He's coming because he wants to, because he's proud of you. Remember that." The morning passed slowly. Rick tried to work on the workshop site, marking boundaries, checking elevations, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept checking his phone, watching the clock, calculating drive times. At 2:30, Bridger touched his shoulder. "Car coming." A silver sedan turned off the highway, slowed as it approached the property. Rick's heart hammered against his ribs. The car parked near the community center. The driver's door opened. Tyler stepped out, and Rick's breath caught. His son had changed, and hadn't changed. Taller than Rick remembered, broader in the shoulders, with the same dark hair, now touched with premature gray at the temples. He wore architect's clothes, nice jeans, a button-down shirt, boots that had never seen a construction site. But his eyes were the same eyes that had looked up at Rick on job sites 20 years ago, eager to learn, proud to be included. Father and son stood 10 feet apart, the distance suddenly feeling enormous. Then Tyler smiled, uncertain but genuine, and closed the gap. They embraced awkwardly at first, both men uncertain of the mechanics after so long apart. Then the embrace became real, became tight, became everything Rick had needed for 15 years. "Dad," Tyler said, his voice thick, "you're here. You're really here." They stood like that for a long moment, neither wanting to let go, both afraid that releasing the embrace might break whatever fragile connection they'd re-established. Finally, they separated. Tyler wiped his eyes unself-consciously. "I've missed you," he said simply. "I've missed you too, every single day." Bridger, Shauna, and Dexter had moved away, giving them space, but staying close enough to be introduced. Rick brought Tyler over, made introductions. His son shook hands with each volunteer, thanked them for helping with the project. "My father always taught me that quality work comes from people who care," Tyler said. "I can see that's exactly what happened here." Then it was time for the tour. Rick walked Tyler through the community center, explaining each space, each decision, each adaptation from the original fellowship hall design. Tyler asked detailed questions about load-bearing walls, about the HVAC system, about window placement for natural light. But his questions weren't just professional, they were personal. He wanted to understand not just how Rick had built it, but why and what it meant. In the library, Tyler stopped at the wall where his childhood photograph and canvas apron hung. He stared at them for a long time without speaking. "I remember that day," he finally said, pointing to the photograph. "You let me help frame a wall. I was so proud. Felt like a real builder." "You were a real builder, you still are." Tyler touched the apron gently. "You kept this?" "Found it in my toolbox. Couldn't let it go. All these months, you've been working under that reminder of what we used to have." "It kept me going," Rick admitted. "Reminded me what I was trying to rebuild, not just this building, but us." Tyler turned to face his father, eyes bright with emotion. "Then let's rebuild it. For real, this time." They walked to the adjacent property, to the 5 acres Tyler had purchased. Rick unrolled the architectural plans on the hood of Tyler's rental car, weighing down the corners with rocks. Together, they reviewed the design, discussing modifications, improvements, how to integrate the workshop with the community center. Their conversation flowed naturally, professionally, two craftsmen solving problems together. But underneath the technical discussion was something deeper. A father and son remembering how to communicate, how to trust each other, how to be family. As the sun began its descent, painting the high basin in gold and amber, Bridger brought out the cornerstone. He and Rick carried it together to the spot where Tyler's architectural plans indicated the foundation would begin. Tyler knelt beside the stone, read the inscription, "Built by many, for all." "Perfect," he said. "Absolutely perfect." "We'll lay it together," Rick said. "Start this right." "When?" "Tomorrow. We'll dig the foundation corners, set the stone, and begin." That evening, the core volunteers gathered at Paulette's diner. She'd closed it to the public, hosting just Rick, Tyler, Bridger, Shauna, Dexter, Luther, Gwen, Patricia, and Vernon. A celebration and a new beginning. Tyler fit in naturally, asking about their stories, their skills, their hopes for what the community center and workshop would become. He spoke about moving his architecture practice to Bridger's Crossing, about wanting to be part of this community instead of just visiting it. Rick watched his son engage with these people who'd become family and felt something settle in his chest. The weight he'd carried for so long, shame, regret, fear, was finally lifting. Late that night, Rick and Tyler stood outside the community center under a sky brilliant with stars. The building was dark, except for a single light in the main gathering space. "Tomorrow we start the workshop," Tyler said. "Together, together," Rick agreed. "Dad, I want you to know I forgive you for everything. The divorce, the bankruptcy, the silence. I forgive you, and I'm sorry I made you carry that burden alone for so long." Rick couldn't speak. He just reached out and squeezed his son's shoulder. "Let's build something neither of us could build alone," Tyler said. And Rick knew they would. Saturday morning arrived cold and bright, the kind of autumn day that made the high basin feel like the center of everything good. Over 300 people gathered at the construction site by 9 a.m., more than had attended the town hall meeting, more than anyone had expected. The mayor was there, the town council, local business owners, families with children, elderly couples who'd lived in Bridger's Crossing their entire lives. News crews from 2 regional stations set up cameras. This wasn't just a groundbreaking anymore. It was a statement about what communities could accomplish when they worked together. A temporary stage had been erected, chairs arranged in rows, but most people stood, crowding close to see the cornerstone that sat on a wooden platform near where the foundation would be dug. Rick stood to the side, uncomfortable with the attention, but Tyler stayed, close beside him, a steady presence. Mayor Talbot opened the ceremony with brief remarks about community resilience, about second chances, about the power of one person's vision to inspire collective action. Then she invited Bridger to speak. The old welder approached the microphone reluctantly, clearly uncomfortable with public speaking. He stood there for a moment, looking out at the crowd, then down at his scarred hands. "I'm not good with words," he began, voice rough. "But I know work. Know what it means to build something that lasts. For 10 years after my wife died, I didn't build anything, just existed. Then I saw Rick out here, one man laying foundation blocks in the heat, and I remembered what it felt like to matter." His voice grew stronger. "This building," he gestured at the community center behind them, "and this workshop we're starting today, they're not just structures, they're proof that we can still come together. That we can still create something bigger than our individual problems." Rick showed us that. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't wait for approval. He just started building, and the rest of us found our way to him. Scattered applause grew into sustained clapping. Shauna spoke next, telling her story of unemployment and desperation, of learning carpentry from Rick, of finding purpose when she'd thought she had nothing left to offer. "He taught me for free," she said. "Spent hours showing me how to read measurements, how to cut square, how to build something that would last." That's who Rick is. Not the man who failed, but the man who gave away his knowledge when he had nothing else to give. Dexter followed, talking about retirement and uselessness, about how contributing his electrical expertise to the community center reminded him that skills don't expire just because you stop getting paid for them. One by one, volunteers shared their stories. Each testimony built on the last, creating a narrative larger than any individual. Experience. This was about transformation, not just Rick's, but the entire community's. Finally, the mayor invited Rick to speak. He approached the microphone with Tyler beside him, both men standing together in front of hundreds of watching faces. Rick had prepared nothing, didn't trust himself with scripted words. He just spoke from the place that had kept him building through the hardest months of his life. "I lost everything," he said simply. "My business, my home, my pride. My son stopped speaking to me, and I didn't blame him. I'd failed at everything that mattered. But I still had my hands, and I still knew how to build. So I did the only thing that made sense. I built something that couldn't fail because it wasn't about me. It was about all of us." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "This community center behind us, it's not mine. It belongs to everyone whose name is in my ledger. Everyone who donated time or materials or expertise or just encouragement when I needed it most. And this workshop we're starting today," he put his hand on Tyler's shoulder, "this is about healing. About a father and son finding their way back to each other through the only language we both speak fluently, building." His voice roughened with emotion. "Tyler taught me that it's never too late. Never too late to rebuild what's broken. Never too late to reach out. Never too late to try again. I'm grateful to everyone here. Grateful to this town for giving me space to prove that failure doesn't have to be final. And I'm especially grateful to my son, who forgave me when I didn't deserve it and offered me partnership when I'd earned nothing but his anger." Rick turned to Tyler. "I love you. I should have said that more when you were growing up. I'm saying it now." Tyler embraced his father in front of everyone, both men holding on while the crowd erupted in applause. When they separated, Tyler took the microphone. "My father taught me everything important," he said. "How to measure twice and cut once. How to respect materials. How to build things that outlast you. But more than that, he taught me about integrity, about doing work that matters even when no one's watching. I forgot those lessons for a while, let anger blind me to who he really was, but watching him build this center reminded me. So I'm here not just to partner with him on this workshop, but to learn from him again, to combine his traditional craftsmanship with modern techniques, to create something neither of us could build alone. He gestured at the architectural plans displayed on boards behind them. This workshop will offer vocational training, carpentry, welding, electrical work, plumbing, skills that can't be outsourced, that will always have value. My father will teach traditional techniques. I'll teach modern design and sustainability. Together, we'll help people build not just structures, but futures. The ceremony moved to the cornerstone laying. Rick and Tyler positioned themselves on opposite sides of the engraved granite. Bridger brought out Rick's father's level, the vintage wooden tool that had guided 3 generations of builders. Father and son lifted the stone together, carried it to the exact spot where the foundation corner would be. They set it down carefully, then Rick placed his father's level on top, checking the position with exacting precision. "Perfect," he said. Tyler knelt beside the stone, placed his hand on the inscription. "Built by many, for all." "That's exactly right." Rick knelt beside his son. Together, they pressed their hands against the cornerstone, formally setting it, beginning the next chapter of this improbable story. The brass bell from the community center rang out, clear and resonant, carrying across the high basin. Bridger had mounted it temporarily on a frame for the ceremony. Its voice announced a new beginning, called people together, reminded everyone what they'd accomplished and what was still to come. As the Ugrin Nevra team said, sound faded, Rick looked at his son, at the volunteers who'd become family, at the community that had given him a second chance. The cornerstone sat solid beneath their hands, ready to support whatever they would build upon it. And for the first time in years, Rick felt certain of the future. The afternoon shifted from ceremony to work. Tyler had arranged for a professional excavation crew to begin the foundation, but before the machinery arrived, he and Rick wanted to break ground together the old way. They stood at the northwest corner where the cornerstone sat, each holding a shovel. The crowd had thinned, but dozens remained, wanting to witness this moment. Rick drove his shovel into the hard earth first. The blade cut clean, turning over dark soil that smelled of autumn and possibility. Tyler followed, his stroke matching his father's rhythm. Together they worked in silence, digging the symbolic first scoops of what would become the workshop foundation. Others joined them. Bridger, Shauna, Dexter, even Vernon. Each person took a turn with the shovel, contributing to the foundation in the most literal way possible. It was slow, inefficient, ceremonial. It was perfect. When the excavation crew arrived with their backhoe, Rick and Tyler stepped back, their role in this part complete. The machinery would do in hours what would take weeks by hand. But those first shovelfuls mattered. They connected this new building to the old ways, to the tradition of building with hands and heart. Tyler made a brief announcement about the workshop schedule. Construction would take 4 months, weather permitting. The building would open in late February, offering its first vocational training classes in March. He'd be relocating his architecture practice to Bridger's Crossing permanently, renting office space above Paulette's diner. The announcement brought cheers. As the backhoe began its work, Rick and Tyler walked back to the community center. Inside, away from the crowds, they stood in the main gathering space and really looked at what had been built. "This is extraordinary, Dad," Tyler said quietly. "The proportions, the light, the way the space feels, it's exactly what you described in those old fellowship hall plans. You built it from memory, had 20 years to refine the design in my head, knew exactly what it should be." They walked through each room together. Tyler examined the framing, the finish work, the electrical installations. His professional eye caught details most people would miss. The careful joinery, the thoughtful placement of outlets and switches, the way load-bearing walls were reinforced. "This is master-level work," he said. "Better than most commercial buildings I've seen. Had good help. Bridger's welding, Dexter's electrical, Vernon's donations. This wasn't just me, but you, orchestrated it, held the vision when no one else could see it. Tyler stopped at the wall where his photograph and childhood apron hung. You kept building toward this, even when I'd given up on you. That must have been hard. Seeing this every day reminded me what I was working for. Not just the building, but us. The chance to be your father again. Tyler was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. I'm moving my practice here, but I'm also moving here because of you. Because I want to be part of your life again. Want to have dinner with you once a week, work alongside you, rebuild what we lost. I'd like that more than anything. Then let's make it real. Not just today, not just during construction, but permanently. Let's be family again. They sat together in the empty gathering space as afternoon light streamed through the windows. Rick told Tyler about the darkest moments, sleeping in the truck, the storm that destroyed the trailer, the town hall meeting where everything could have ended. Tyler told Rick about watching from Denver, about the internal struggle between anger and love, about the moment he decided to buy the adjacent land. I was in my office, Tyler explained, looking at photographs of the construction online. Patricia's documentation project, the posts Shauna made, local news coverage. And I realized I'd spent 15 years being angry at you for failing when I should have been there helping you succeed. That's when I contacted the property owner, started the purchase process, began designing the workshop. You could have just called, could have offered to help without investing so much. I needed to show you I was serious, that I wasn't just offering words, but real partnership. The land, the plans, the construction, funding those were my way of saying I believe in you, I believe in this, and I'm all in. Rick reached out, squeezed his son's shoulder. Thank you. For the second chance, for the grace, for coming home. Thank you for never giving up, for building this even when it seemed impossible. That evening, as the sun set over the high basin, they held an informal gathering at Paulette's diner. She'd prepared a feast, roast chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh bread, apple pie. The Corps volunteers came, along with Vernon and his wife, the mayor, and a dozen others who'd been instrumental in making the project succeed. Bridger raised his coffee cup in a toast. To building what matters. Everyone raised their drinks, coffee, water, soda. To building what matters. Rick looked around the table at these people who'd become family. Paulette, who'd fed him when he had nothing. Bridger, who'd worked beside him in silence and solidarity. Shauna, who'd found purpose alongside him. Dexter, who'd contributed expertise freely. Vernon, who'd moved from opposition to alliance. And Tyler, his son, home again. The conversation flowed easily, laughter mixing with serious discussion about the workshop's future, about training programs and community needs. Plans were made, roles assigned, a future sketched in broad strokes that would be refined in the months ahead. As people began leaving, Tyler pulled Rick aside. Dad, tomorrow I want you to teach me some of the traditional techniques Grandpa taught you. The joinery methods, the old ways of working with wood. I've got modern training, but I've lost some of that foundational knowledge. I'd be honored to teach you. Then, it's a date, 7 a.m., the workshop site. Just you and me. They embraced one more time before Tyler headed to his hotel. Rick watched his son drive away, but this time without the ache of separation. Tomorrow they'd work together again, and the day after that, and all the days that followed. The future stretched out, full and bright and possible. 3 months later, in mid-January, Rick stood inside the completed workshop and marveled at what father and son had built together. The structure was modern yet timeless. Tyler's clean architectural lines married to Rick's traditional craftsmanship. Steel beams Bridger had welded supported exposed the wood trusses that Rick had hand-joined using techniques his father had taught him 40 years ago. The space was divided into training areas, carpentry stations with workbenches and tool storage, a welding bay with proper ventilation and safety equipment, an electrical training section with demo panels, a plumbing area with mock installations. Everything designed for hands-on learning, for passing knowledge from those who had it to those who needed it. Tyler had moved into a small house on the edge of town, his architecture practice thriving with projects throughout the county. He and Rick had dinner together every Wednesday at Paulette's Diner, a standing date neither would miss. They'd worked side by side through the entire construction process, their relationship strengthening with each shared decision, each solved problem, each moment of collaboration. The community center had been operating since October, hosting daily activities that filled it with life. Monday mornings brought job search workshops led by Paulette. Tuesday afternoons, Gwen ran a reading program for adults, improving their literacy. Wednesday evenings, Dexter taught basic electrical repair. Thursday nights, the space became a community meal service, feeding anyone who needed it. Weekends brought various gatherings, support groups, celebrations. The building had become exactly what Rick envisioned, a place where people could come together without judgment, find help without shame, contribute according to their abilities. Today was the official dedication ceremony for the workshop, combined with a time capsule sealing in the community center. Over 400 people attended, the largest gathering Bridges Crossing had seen in decades. The ceremony began inside the community center's main hall, filled to capacity with standing room only. Mayor Talbot spoke about transformation, about what happens when one person's determination inspires collective action. She read from Rick's ledger, listing names of everyone who'd contributed, acknowledging that this achievement belonged to all of them. Then came the time capsule. Patricia had organized it, soliciting contributions from throughout the community. People had submitted photographs, letters, newspaper clippings, personal mementos, predictions about the future. The capsule itself was a stainless steel cylinder that would be sealed into the wall, not to be opened for 25 years. Rick placed his original napkin sketch inside, the coffee-stained drawing he'd made at Paulette's Diner that had started everything. Tyler added the photograph of them from his childhood, the one that had hung on the wall throughout construction. Others came forward with their contributions. Shauna placed a copy of her first paycheck from her new carpentry job. Bridger added his father's welding goggles. Vernon included a business card from his company with a note about reconciliation. One by one, the items went into the capsule. When it was full, they sealed it and carried it to the prepared space in the wall. Together, Rick and Tyler cemented it in place, troweling mortar smooth, ensuring it would remain undisturbed for a quarter-century. Rick gave brief remarks, his comfort with public speaking grown through necessity. 25 years from now, when someone opens this capsule, I hope they'll see not just what we built, but why. We built because we could, because we had skills and time and a need to matter. Because community isn't something that just exists, it's something we create together, one brick at a time, one act of kindness at a time, one shared purpose at a time. He gestured at Tyler, standing beside him. I started this alone, convinced I had nothing left to offer. I was wrong. I had everything that mattered: knowledge, determination, and the capacity to change. My son taught me that. He showed me that failure isn't final, that relationships can be rebuilt, that it's never too late to become the person you should have been all along. The crowd moved to the workshop for its dedication. Rick and Tyler had prepared the first-class offering schedule, posted prominently inside. Carpentry fundamentals taught by Rick every Monday and Thursday, modern design principles taught by Tyler on Tuesdays, welding with Bridger on Wednesdays, electrical with Dexter on Friday mornings. All classes were free. All were open to anyone wanting to learn. That evening, after the ceremony ended and the crowds dispersed, Rick and Tyler worked together in the workshop. They were building furniture for the community center, simple but sturdy tables and chairs, to replace the mismatched donations. Tyler watched as Rick demonstrated a traditional mortise and tenon joint, the kind that had held furniture together for centuries before modern fasteners. "Grandpa taught you this?" Tyler asked. "When I was 16. Said these joints would outlast anything made with screws or nails." He was right. Tyler practiced the messes technique, his hands moving carefully, precisely. Rick corrected his grip, adjusted his chisel angle, guided him through the process with patience. "You're a good teacher, Dad. I learned from the best, and I'm learning again from you. The sustainable design principles you've taught me, the modern materials, I'm a better builder because of you." They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from deep understanding. Father and son, building together, the distance between them finally closed. Later, Rick stood outside in the cold January night, looking at both buildings. Lights glowed in windows. Inside the community center, a support group meeting was ending, people hugging goodbye, promising to return next week. The workshop stood dark but ready, waiting for Monday when the first classes would begin. Tyler emerged from the workshop, locked the door, joined his father. "You built something extraordinary," Tyler said. "We built it, all of us. But you started it. That first foundation block, that first decision to keep building when everyone thought you were done. That took courage I'm not sure I have. You have it. You proved it by coming here, by offering partnership instead of judgment." They stood together in the darkness, watching their breath fog in the cold air, feeling the satisfaction of work completed and work yet to come. "Dad," Tyler said quietly, "I'm proud to be your son." Rick couldn't speak, just pulled Tyler close, held him tight, felt 15 years of separation finally, completely heal. Inside the community center, someone turned on the exterior lights. The buildings illuminated against the winter darkness, beacons of hope on the high basin, built by many, for all. Rick had started with nothing but a toolbox and a dream. He'd ended with everything that mattered: purpose, community, and his son. The cornerstone inscription was right. This was built by many, and it would serve all for generations to come.